Hello, everyone. This is the Keeping It Real in Real Estate show, and I'm your host, Kathy Blakey. I'm a realtor with Century 21, a marketer, entrepreneur, and nature enthusiast. In this podcast series, I'm going to take you on a journey as we explore topics in real estate, including the market, mortgages, common inspection issues, sustainable future, and more. Are you a homeowner? Future homeowner? Do you like saving money? Enjoy healthy living? Then this podcast series may be for you. Stay tuned as we go deep into these topics. And don't forget, subscribe, like, and share. In this episode, we're going to be learning about stucco. As a real estate agent, when I'm counseling buyers on the purchase of their home, one of the things that I like to do is point out the types of inspections they should expect to get, some problems that I've seen from time to time, and really educate them as much as possible through the process, because this is a big investment when you're purchasing a home. And sellers alike, you're selling a big investment, you want to be informed. So we're going to be learning about stucco in home construction. What is it? What problems do we encounter? And what can we do about it? So today we're going to be talking about stucco. And I'd like to take a moment and have Tom introduce himself.
Hi. All right. Well, thank you very much. My name's Tom Bartholetti. The company is Inspection Services Group. We've been in business for about 7 years now, and we do stucco inspections along with home inspections, but we're really going to focus on stucco inspections at this time. In my past, I've been in the construction industry since the late 70s into the 80s and, well into the 90s as well. So I have a strong background on all aspects of the home construction phases and industry. And we're really going to focus on the stucco. It's a huge concern with everybody, and being one of the top investment values of, by buying and selling a house, it makes it a very critical piece of the overall transaction.
Okay. Thanks for joining us today, Tom.
Absolutely.
So Tom, can you tell us a little bit more about why we see stucco coming up in inspections?
Sure, absolutely. So first I'll start off with a little history and where this was really identified and what the problems really are. But I'd like to start with stucco as a product is not the problem. A stucco wall will last many, many years if it's just a solid stucco wall. The issues are primarily wall penetrations, windows, doors, or any other types of penetrations, lack of flashings, which some of them really were developed after the problems were identified, and overall just general maintenance. So the problems really started with houses built in the mid to late 80s. Houses built prior to that aren't as high of a risk, and some either older houses, really there's no real reason other than for the homeowner or a potential buyer to feel good about having the stucco done.
Okay, and why is that? So
in the 80s, there was a housing boom of the 80s. Mm-hmm. The houses were growing in size, and they wanted to have a more upper scale appearance to them. So they got rid of the old aluminum and vinyl siding, which wasn't a very good product at the time. And they built a lot more houses with stucco on the exterior walls. It just gave it a much nicer look and richer look. And then they used different types of windows. Well, over that time period, a lot of the materials changed at the same times. So with the housing boom, they didn't have as many skilled laborers available to support the workload or demand for the work. So the abilities of the contractors decreased significantly as well. So the work itself kind of got a little bit less. And then, like I mentioned, the materials have changed over that same time period. Previous, they would use what's called the underlayment sheathing. So you have your framed wall structure, then you have your wall sheathing. Okay. In the past, or at that time, they were going through a lot of transitions. It was plywood is the most common at that time. And plywood would be able to handle a certain level of moisture and get dry and get a little bit more moisture, and it wouldn't really deteriorate or rot.
Oh, I see.
Prior to plywood, they used 1x12 or 1x6 pine planking, which withstood even more moisture.
Okay.
Right. So, but in the 80s, they changed it. Plywood, wood itself was at a premium because of the construction boom. So they were trying to think of ways how to use less wood. They needed the wood framing structure part of it. So they came out with several different products. They came out with a foam insulation board. They came out with a gypsum type wall material that they used. And I'll talk about each one of these a little bit. Then they also had a fiberboard material. And later they even came up with what's called OSB, oriented strand board.
Okay.
And that product today is the most common used product on your wall sheathing, and that does not withstand any moisture.
Oh, okay. I can see there how that could create a problem.
Right. So the other products, which we'll get into that when we talk about testing a little bit, because there's different techniques and tricks used to really verify what type of substrate it is in order to properly identify or analyze what the problems may possibly be. So over that same time period, so in the 80s, they also introduced a new product. It came over from Europe, and it's called EIFS, E-I-F-S. It stands for Exterior Insulated Finishing Systems. And that product in Europe, the primary construction is masonry. So they put this EIFS product over top of masonry.
Okay.
And when or if it leaked or had water issues, there was no damage. It's masonry.
Okay.
So in the United States, the primary construction is wood framed or the plywood or whatever type of sheathing material they use on the exterior. Then they use this EIFS product on the exterior. Well, they found that had a lot of problems. It wasn't flashed properly. It wasn't sealed properly. There were areas around windows and other wall penetrations that allowed moisture to get behind it.
Okay.
And when water gets behind EIFS or a stucco product, it has nowhere to go, and it rots out the underlaying wood framing and construction. So the EIFS product was quickly not used anymore in the residential areas, in our area. It's still used in some other parts of the country. So there were a lot of legal lawsuits and a lot of issues through the 80s and into the 90s. And in the early 90s, they found out that the same problem is occurring with traditional stucco.
Okay.
So, and that was the primary exterior cladding system used on the new construction at that time. And even today, it's still used, quite often. So because of the EIFS product, they found and realized the problem also exists with traditional stucco. And that's really what we're going to focus on here, because that's what residential houses that have stucco in our area are what we call traditional stucco. The EIFS product is used primarily for commercial in our area.
I see.
And it's used in residential in other parts of the country.
Okay, well, great. Thank you so much for that background. So, Tom, what kind of stucco construction exists?
All right, great question. So there are the primary traditional stucco can either be a 3-layer application or a 2-layer application. The most common is a 3-layer, where they, over top of the wall cladding material, the plywood or whatever type of wall sheathing they use, they then use a moisture barrier and a wire lath or type of screening, and that's what really holds the stucco on the house. And then on top of that, they'll put a scratch coat that's really embedded into the wire lath and holds that together, really well. And then they'll put a brown coat over top of that, and then the finish coat. So, and between each layer, as it's applied, each layer needs to cure, dry properly before the second layer is applied, or you could potentially have excessive cracking. So if there's walls that have excessive cracking, that could potentially be a problem.
Okay, good to know.
Is it was applied too quickly.
Okay.
So now the other part of that is it's a synthetic stone, which is widely used. And synthetic stone, it's fake stone, it's man-made product, but it looks like real stone. It's a very nice product. And that really should be considered exactly like stucco. So if a house has synthetic stone, it should have the same concerns and potential issues that stucco house has. The way to really tell is if you knock on it with the end of a screwdriver is the easiest way to do it. Otherwise, you could hurt your fingers or hand if you try to use your hand. You use the screwdriver, and if you hear a hollow sound to it, it's synthetic stone most likely. But if it's a nice solid sound, it's real stone. So what that is it's only about an inch or to an inch and a half thick. And like I mentioned, this 3-ply application, you have your scratch coat and brown coat and then the finish coat. Well, the synthetic stone is the finish coat.
Is that also known as like the lick 'em and stick 'em?
Lick and stick, yes, yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what it can also be classed or named or another name for it. So those products should all be treated and tested the same as if it's a stucco home. So now there are, in some cases, they'll use real stone and cut them down to 1 inch, thickness and put them over top. So it can also be a real stone look that's still applied like a synthetic stone that should be tested.
So it's really the issue of what's behind?
Yes.
The material?
It's the layers and it's over top of wood.
Okay.
And the issue is real stone or brick. It's because of the thickness. Real stone thickness, usually a wall is 6 inches thick, at least. Maybe even greater. With a brick, it could be 3 to 4 inches. And there's usually a 1 inch gap between a brick wall, stone wall, and the wood construction that allows any moisture and it should come out of the weep holes at the bottom.
Okay.
So brick walls and stone walls aren't as big of a risk unless there's stucco or something like if it's a partial wall.
Okay.
If like it's the first 3 or 4 feet have a decorative wall to it, could be real stone, but then above it's stucco, that's when there's an issue potentially behind the stone.
Behind it, okay.
But if it's a full stone wall or full brick wall, there's typically, other than there's still maintenance that needs to be done that's, it seems to be forgotten or just, let go, that to prevent some areas. But because of the way the construction's done, it's not as high of a risk as stucco itself or the synthetic stone.
Okay, so I'm a real estate agent, and if I'm representing a buyer or, if there's a buyer listening today to this podcast, what type of inspection should they have and how do they know that they need that inspection?
Sure. So the types of inspections it's really broken down into 3 phases. It's a phase 1, a phase 2, and phase 3. Typically, and I'll go into each one a little bit, but typically they're all done at the same time. Okay. Rarely a phase 1 will be done for someone to evaluate it and then give approval to move on to the phase 2 and phase 3.
I see. Okay.
That happens occasionally with reload companies or insurance companies because they want that proof first before you move on. And typically, but you don't find much out other than general information. So the 3 phases themselves are, a phase 1 is really you're just assessing everything and gathering information. What type of material it is, the types of windows, is it missing flashings, what flashings there are, the size of the areas, So you're doing a whole assessment of the house, the surroundings, the area, the materials, to determine the high risk areas to do the testing. So phase 1, really, it takes probably half the amount of the entire inspection because you could generate about 85% of the report just by gathering the information. The report can be then, pretty much finalized or processed that you have all this information in a report ready to go. So phase 2 is when you're actually doing the measuring. That's when you actually drill the holes to test and the moisture levels behind the stucco, and you're measuring the wood or wall cladding material behind the stucco for moisture levels. And where you're measuring should never have wet or moisture. So that's really, there's the philosophy of, you can't do it so many days after a rain, you can't do it. That's not quite true because it should never ever be wet. And I tell people is, theoretically, you could do it in a pouring rain and it should still be dry. But the risk is the equipment could get moisture on it, and just being in the rain, is a bit of a risk. But where you're measuring should never have moisture.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter if it rained the day before, the hour before. There's just different risk involved. So we try not to do it we try to let it dry for 24 hours because stucco, being a porous material, retains a certain level of moisture. So if the moisture is retained in the stucco, the probes, if not properly protected, could rub against the stucco and you could be getting false readings.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So we really let things, exactly. So to avoid that, avoid even the potential risk of any of that, we really let things dry. 24 hours is more than enough before we proceed with the stucco. So that's phase 2 is the actual measuring. And I'll get into a little bit more detail about that too. And then phase 3 is what they call exploratory. Now, we do a limited exploratory, and most inspection companies do a limited exploratory because the true exploratory is you cut a 6x6 opening in the stucco and look behind it.
Okay, 6x6.
6 inches by 6 inches.
Okay, got it. Mm-hmm.
But we're not equipped as inspectors to fix that.
I see.
So we don't do that.
Right.
But that's what phase 3 is. So for our phase 3 is we'll do a core hole sample.
Okay.
Now the core holes we do are 2 inches round. So we'll drill out or bore out a 2-inch round hole so we can then see the material underneath of it and make an assessment from that. Then we put the core back in and we seal it all up and caulk it all in.
So that's kind of fascinating. And if you're a seller and being approached by a buyer with a request to have someone come and drill holes in your property, what kind of comfort can you give to a seller that you're not damaging their property, that this is, customary, or help us with that?
Yeah, sure. So there's a lot of concern with that. So first I just want to add that any of these holes that we drill now, during the measuring process, they're only 1/4-inch holes.
Okay.
But there's 2 of them at every location that you need to drill.
Okay.
They are filled with a color matching caulk. Mm-hmm. And in many cases, you can't even see them unless you know exactly where to look for them.
Now, is that to get a moisture?
It's just to seal the hole back.
Okay.
So it doesn't, have any problems.
Okay.
I'll get into the testing equipment in a little bit. So there is a concern that, oh my gosh, you're putting all these holes in my house and I'll see them. It'll look terrible. So we carry a lot of different colors or shades of caulk so we can best match it. And not every time do we have a perfect match, but we come as close as we can without carrying, we don't carry 50 shades of this. We carry, about 7 to 10 different colors of caulk or shades of caulk to match it as best. And on a stucco, the rougher the stucco or more coarse that the finish is, you can hide it better.
Okay. Now, does that wood core go back in?
No, it's not a wood core. Okay. It's actually a core of the stucco. Okay. That goes back in. So the holes are blown out to get all the dust out of them. They're cleaned out. Even the core. I'll get back to the core because that's done a little differently. And then the holes filled with caulk. Okay. So on the core, now we try to avoid, not every house gets a core sample.
I see.
A core sample is usually performed if we have an area that tests like for rotted wood and we want to verify it. Okay. We'll do a core in an area that we know has to be fixed anyhow. And just so we can see it and get a better picture of it. And also we'll do a core if we need to identify the material. So to go back to, remember I said there's different types of wall cladding or wall sheathing material. Right. If foam board or fiberboard or gypsum board is used, when the drilling occurs, when you hit them with a drill, it goes right through them to give you the indication that, the wood might be rotted. Okay. But it might not be wood. It might be one of those 3 products.
I see.
So if we have that occurring at multiple locations, we want to do a core to find out exactly what that material is before we can do an assessment. Because we don't want to falsely tell people their wood's all rotted.
Right. When it's just okay, right. Which is going to be softer anyway.
Exactly. So we'll do a core to identify. We also identify the thickness of the material. Just a lot of other details are required. We try to do cores not on the front of the house. So we'll try to hide it. There's usually always the left or right side of the house. Usually it's opposite side of the driveway that is hidden by bushes or garden, some type of shrubbery. And that's where we'll primarily do the core for identification purposes. Or we'll do it to identify or verify damage if we already suspect damage.
Okay, and you suspect damage from the assessment and
so like I said, most houses have plywood if they're older houses or OSB. And during the drilling process, as the drill goes through the stucco, there's a little bit of a gap and you feel a bump from the tester. And at that point, you stop, because at that point, the drill hit the wood and usually it nicked into the wood a little bit. That's where you want to do your measurements. Well, if we know it's OSB and it goes through, it's probably because it's damaged already.
Okay.
So that's where we would then say, okay, well, and we don't do multiple cores. Well, we don't usually do multiple cores. We'll do one and we say, yes, it's rotted OSB. If we have the same circumstance with the drill issue, it's most likely rotted OSB in other areas.
So the drilling helps to identify it, and the third step is to verify and sort of prove.
Yes, so there's a lot of troubleshooting that's occurring during the drilling process. And a lot of it has to do with feel, what you're hitting, knowing what you're hitting, how the drill's affected, and then even the probe itself. So we use a Delmorst BD 2100 probe. It's one of the most common out there for testing moisture, and we're measuring the moisture in the wood. Well, even the probe itself, if you put the probe in and you bump on the handle a little bit with your other hand, sometimes it'll go push through because the wood is soft.
Okay.
So it's already in the process of deteriorating. So there's a lot of troubleshooting that goes on from feel of what everything is and how it's indicated.
Sounds like a pretty time-consuming process.
Well, it can be. It could be a 2 to 3 hour process minimum, depending on the size of the house. Usually about a 3,500 square foot house could be done in that 3 hour period. Larger houses take a little longer.
Right.
And it depends a lot on the construction, how the house is laid out, the terrain, how many hills, trees, because that's going to affect moving ladders and maneuvering around the house.
Right.
So a lot goes into effect. It's hard to say this size house is this takes this long. It just really, there's a lot of
you probably have to see the terrain.
Exactly.
Okay. I can understand
but
that.
about 3,500, typically we can finish under 3 hours.
So, Tom, if your inspection process, when you go through the stucco inspection for the buyer during a real estate transaction, or really any homeowner, if the stucco problem is found, what's the next step for remediation?
Sure. So if areas are identified, and in many cases, like I mentioned, the kickout flashing, we would recommend putting kickout flashing even if there was no damage.
Because
the kickout flashing area causes the most damage to a wall section or a house. Although not every house has a kickout flashing area. It just depends on how the house is constructed. Every house has a window. So on the average, there's 35 windows thereabouts on the average house today. So a lot of issues are identified with windows because there's so many of them. So when problems or damage is identified, depending on where and how large of an area is affected. Now, we don't actually do any work.
Okay.
So I'm not the one who would be guaranteeing it.
Right.
The contractor's really that person, and it really is the comfort level of the contractor. But I believe that if it's one window on a wall that's one section, and depending on what the problem actually is, that area could be fixed.
Okay.
They call that surgical repairs. But I'm not the one guaranteeing it or saying, so the person guaranteeing it may want the entire wall done, like from corner to corner. But if it's multiple windows on the same wall, you don't want to see blotchy repairs all over the place. It just looks sloppy, but it's usually corner to corner on windows. And then it's really up to the person, the homeowner, how far do they want to go? Because you could have a problem on one wall and not another wall just because of the weather patterns.
Okay.
Because how it's constructed is going to be the same. It's typically going to be the same window types and everything else is the same. But the weather coming from the west side is going to hit the wall, more than it would hit the east side. So it's a higher risk. You may have more damage occurring on the west side.
How about shades and trees?
Well, that too, right? Exactly. That has a lot to do with it also. At the same token, that southwest air sides are going to get more sun, so they would dry out faster.
Right, if there were an
issue.
So it
just depends. There's so many different variables. But if you find a problem on one wall, I don't believe you don't have to have your entire house done.
Right, it's going to depend.
Fix that wall, maybe go from corner to corner. It might be an entire wall section. So to remediate it, they would typically remove the entire layer of stucco and identify the area. Now, they also have to remove the wire lath because that's where the stucco's embedded in it. You can't remove stucco without the wire lath, typically. And then they may remove the moisture barrier so then they can see the wall sheathing material. And they would fix any damaged or rotted materials.
Right.
On some instances, they may remove the windows. So when they put the new moisture barrier, it can be applied properly.
I see.
Because that's what I was saying, the flashing detail around the window, which can only be seen when it's installed. You can't see it any other time or know how it's done. That itself could be potentially the problem too. So, you won't know it. You'll just know that, there's an issue here, and it may just have to do with how the moisture barrier is applied. So they may take the windows off so they can then cover the window with the moisture barrier, properly wrap the window areas and protection, put the windows in, do the whole protection around the windows, and then redo the stucco after that. So really, a lot also depends on what types of windows they have. So there's a lot of, it can go from a real small area, to the extreme of that entire wall has to get. Speaking
of extremes, I know you're not the one doing the repairs, but could you think of any example where it was just the perfect storm of bad?
Yeah, usually they're found in those kick-out flashing areas where it potentially, because of the amount of moisture that could get in those kick-out flashing areas, we've seen where most of the time it's just wall sheathing material that's affected.
Okay.
But if it's let go long enough, or the amount of moisture is excessive, like those areas, it could start rotting out the framing structure.
Oh, that's bad.
And even if it gets in a second floor or higher up, it usually will trickle down and it'll affect the framing structure that sits on top of the foundation.
Okay, so that's bad.
And it'll rot out those, it could rot out the sill plating and the plates that are all, your joist and your joist boards at the bottom. So that would be worse.
Well, that sounds like a great reason why any buyer or homeowner really should get their stucco inspected.
Absolutely. So the trend, though, we've seen over the past 3 to 5 years, primarily 3 years, is in the past, the stucco inspections were primarily done by the buyer. And it's usually done at the end of the whole transaction process.
Yes.
Which just puts a lot of anxiety.
Sure does.
So we've seen that trend is there's more and more homeowners getting it done as pre-listing so they can prepare for it.
I can absolutely agree with that because no one wants that surprise. There's a lot of domino effect in a real estate transaction, and finding out halfway through that when, 3 or 4 people are planning to move, that there's this issue, and then it's a rush to get it fixed, and of course the unexpected expense.
Right.
It's a whole nother element to that. So I really couldn't agree more with the pre-listing inspection.
Yeah, so we've seen that now today, most stucco inspections are done as pre-listing inspections.
Mm-hmm. And it's an assurance to the buyer who's getting ready to purchase that home that's one less surprise it's going to come up. To already know that there's that inspection that's been done. It's been given sort of a clean bill of health, if you will. The other thing, just from a homeowner standpoint, you live in the home, you've already, maybe you didn't get an inspection done when you first purchased it, but you've been living there 5 years, 10 years. Any suggestions for homeowners such as that?
Well, I would suggest, first of all, have it tested. And just the fact that it falls into those categories, it's just higher risk. Because if you don't fix it now or do the proper maintenance to protect against it, it's only going to get worse. It's never going to just stop, go away, or that's as worse, that's as bad as it's going to get. So it may just be at this time, to me, I'll call it minor rotted wall sheathing. But if it's let go, it could then affect the framing. So get it done, get it fixed, and maintain the house. Maintaining it is huge because we see quite often that it's just because of lack of maintenance. And the lack of maintenance is really primarily caulking. Caulking around every window, every door, every wall penetration. And even those miter joints I was talking about, those themselves should be caulked so moisture can't get in between, underneath of them, behind the stucco.
Yeah, it's that ounce of prevention.
Exactly. Correct.
Yeah.
And then even after you have it done, caulking itself needs to be maintained. Check it at least yearly. It should be checked twice a year. But, even if you check it yearly, that should be pretty good. And fix it immediately is huge, because if you have, and the whole trick with caulking is, if you have an area that needs to be recaulked, you need to clean it and prep it properly.
I see. So don't just go out with the caulk gun.
Because if you just caulk over top of it, it is not going to last. You're going to just keep going over top. And it's not going to last. You really need to get all the old caulk out, clean it properly, wipe it down. Any type of dirt, grease, anything needs to be removed and get a nice thick bead of caulk on there. We see sometimes the homeowners, and homeowners can do all this work themselves, but sometimes homeowners will put it on there and they'll run their finger or a tool through the caulk and it'll be too thin.
Oh, okay.
And too thin of caulk will crack or deteriorate much faster. You're better off with a nice thick bead of caulk. It still looks good. You get color matching caulk so you can't see it. And that's what really prevents it. A nice thick bead of caulk done properly could last 5+ years. Okay. Then if you do it, and you can't, and the quality of caulk is huge too. You can't just go to the local hardware stores typically and buy this type of caulk. It should really be a caulk that's recommended or required for that type of application.
Oh, okay. I don't think most people know that.
You have to most of the time you have to go to building supplies to get it.
Okay, good to know. Yeah. Well, we're just getting a wealth of great tips from you, Tom, today. Appreciate that.
Oh, absolutely. Really enjoyed this. So, a lot of information on it.
So, before we wrap up, we covered a lot about the reasons why there are issues with stucco and the build process, how to prevent it, why it should be inspected. Is there anything else that you can think of that you might want to touch on today?
Nothing I can think of, but I just wanted to add that, like we were talking about the pre-listing inspections, it really empowers the homeowner to have it done ahead of time too. Because if it's done in the process of a sale, like you'd mentioned, everyone's rushing. Oh my gosh, I want this much, I want that much. You're trying to find a contractor quickly. Well, if you get it done on your own time, you can go get proper pricing. You could save thousands of dollars just by being able to price shop and find the contractors, negotiate with the contractors.
Right, versus a quick.
So that alone could save a lot of money in the long run if they just do it ahead of time and prepare for it. And then they can always just show proof that it's done if they decide to put their house on the market.
Right, or the buyer can still have their own inspection too.
And a lot of times they do, but you do have a much better comfort level knowing that it's been done. This has been fixed. I've been maintaining it. Who cares if they have their inspection done? Because you feel better about, what they're testing.
Yep. So I've certainly learned a lot today, and I hope that our listeners have as well. So Tom, thank you so much for participating in this Stucco-focused podcast today. Before we leave, I'd like to have the audience know a little bit more about you and your services and how to reach you.
Sure, absolutely. So our website is www.isgroup-llc.com. If you also want to know more about Stucco, we're doing a 6-part series on stucco and stucco inspections that we've started. I think we're in part 3, but they are available on our Facebook page, which is also available through our website too. So you can really contact us through that. And on our website, we have a lot of information about stucco inspections. It talks about the phases and what we do, the whole process of the testing itself. Or you could also give us a call directly at 484-324-4500. Talk to one of our client care coordinators. And any questions about stucco, I'd be more than happy to answer. Leave a message at the office, and I can absolutely answer any questions to give you a call back. So some of our other services we offer, in addition to the stucco inspections, we do home, termite, and radon inspections, pool inspections, well inspections, septic inspections, water, indoor air quality, and mold inspections, which I'd be really happy. Hopefully we can coordinate and we can talk about some of those a little bit more in depth also. We also service PA and Delaware. We cover all of Delaware, and we cover the southeast territory of Pennsylvania. So it's in total, I think it might be 9 or 10 counties in total that we cover. So we cover a large area. We have our offices set up in Westchester, Pennsylvania. So it's been really fun. I've enjoyed it. Like I said, any questions on stucco, I'd be more than happy to answer for anybody.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Keeping It Real in Real Estate with Kathy Blakey as your host. For more information on this episode or others, visit www.keepingitrealinfo.com. There you can find information about becoming a guest speaker, episode notes, and contact information for the guest speakers. You can also connect with me on social media by using the key terms Kathy Blakey Realtor. Find me on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or YouTube. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, you can find it on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, and more. Thanks for listening. As a disclaimer, this show is not intended to be a replacement for professional advice. For specific issues related to your real estate transaction, please consult with your qualified realtor, mortgage broker, home inspector, or real estate attorney. Thank you.